What's up, everybody? It's Wednesday. I'm Mike Barry. We're having a chat. How are you guys tonight? Wednesday, this was probably the least productive day. I keep having this thing where I don't want to work on Monday, I don't want to work on Friday, and it turns out I don't really want to work on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday either. So we're having a bit of a work week thing. I think I got like 4 hours of sleep last night, and then I took a nap, and it was one of the less productive days of my life, and I'm okay with that. I wanted to share with you guys a couple things before we chat with Barry. We're going to dig deep with Barry on some things about how lawyers network with each other and the purpose in different communities. And I wanted to just share some resources before we do that. So let me go over to the page that will allow me to do that. The first thing, real quick, that I wanted to share with you guys, I don't know if you've been as freaked out about this as I have, but the rules about the PPP repayment are crazy. They're weird, they're vague, they're ever-changing. There's just not a lot of direction on this. The penalty for getting it wrong is like $1 million fine and prison time. I mean, everybody's freaking out about how to spend this money. And so I finally got that PPP money, and now it's put me in this spot where I'm super anxious about how to spend it. So somebody in the Maximum Lawyer group had shared this video that I'm going to share with you guys on repayment stuff. And so hopefully that's useful to you, and you can figure out how to repay that. The two other things I wanted to share with you, one was this. Bob Ambrogi wrote an article about a database of lawyer billing rates. And I Clio did the same thing with their Clio Legal Trends report in the first year. I don't know how I feel about this. I think there's probably too little data for it to be statistically significant. So I don't know what conclusions you're drawing from any of these numbers. I also worry about price fixing stuff. I mean, if you show up out of law school and because everybody else is charging $250, you charge $250, that says nothing about your relative value to the person that you're serving. But it's good business practice to benchmark, to know sort of where your cost should be relative to the marketplace. So it's useful. I will say, for those of you who are looking to build an expertise-driven firm, one where, essentially market rates just don't matter, right? You're in a market of just you. Amazon has to worry a lot about how much do they charge for a book, because people can go get the book somewhere else. And so if you're running a business that's like that, that's more a service-oriented business, it's more local, it's more audience-driven, yes, you got to pay close attention to the relative prices. If you're somebody who's trying to build an expert firm, screw any of that. Like, none of this really matters, right? The whole point is that you're in a market, you're creating a market by just being you. And so take this with a grain of salt, but I thought it might be helpful to some of you. So that's Bob Ambrogi's article. The last thing I wanted to talk about real quick is our friends at Law Clerk. They decided to do a virtual event, The Successful Business and Practice of Law. And Law Clerk obviously has connections to a lot of really smart people. Here are some of the speakers if you want to look at this page. A lot of them are friends of ours. They've been in this group. They've presented here before. I should get Morris Lilienthal to come hang out with me tonight. But anyway, here's the link to that if you guys want to register. I think I'm going to have Kristen Tyler on next week to chat about the event. I think this movement to virtual events is really interesting, and whether people believe that they're worth it or not, I think is really interesting. I had somebody ask me about that for the Lawyer Forward event, and I told him, I did a pay what you can model. Like, I didn't even try to go out and say, this is worth just as much as a live event or it's worth more. I just said to people, do what you want. And actually, I really like that model. I do have to tell you, the live conference was a loss leader every year. Every year we lost money on, except for, I think the last year, it might have made like $4,000 or something, but it relative to the amount of time it took, it was a loss leader. the virtual event, even with 80% not paying anything, and then the sponsors, because the costs were so low, it grossed way more than it netted way more than any of the live events. So that's something to think about. Hosting virtual events is really good for a law firm. If you can do that in your community, if you want to create like a local businesses surviving COVID-19 event and bring people together and do a virtual thing, just keep in mind, it's pretty easy to do. I went through YouTube and a simple WordPress page. It's pretty low lift for something you can do quickly and have a big impact. So anyway, if nothing else, watch the Law Clerk one just to learn from how they're doing. So those were my resources for today. At this point, I want to turn to Barry. Barry, you and I haven't talked, I think, since the virtual conference. How are you doing? That feels like so long ago, but it was just a few weeks.
It was, but when you're working at home every day, it's hard to tell whether time is going fast or slow. I mean, every day to me seems very productive and long, but when I look up at the end of the day, I'm getting a lot of things done, and I'm feeling pretty well and starting to see signs of life, both in the weather and just people walking around, and people, I think, feeling a little more optimistic, at least here. And when I'm walking around, that's what I'm seeing and feeling. So I guess that's a good thing.
Oh, and I should point out, Barry was nice enough to send me a copy of his book. He even signed it. So
yes.
I think the lesson is that you guys need to hunt Barry down and get him to get you a signed. He actually even sent me an extra copy that I can go give to someone. So you guys should follow up with Barry. Go buy his book, Evolutions of a Law Practice. It's really good because it's personal, right? And you know me, I'm not a big fan of just people waxing wise on the internets. Like, I like when people tell me their story. So I appreciate you sending that and telling me your story, and everybody else through the book. So
thank you, Mike. And it is all about the stories, and that's what I tried to do there. It was from the heart, it was real, and if there's lessons in it, I hope people enjoy them.
So I did want to talk to you about that, because you and I, we seem to keep coming back around to this very human act of being a lawyer, and especially about community stuff. And you participated, I had promoted last week, Nina was hosting I think it was last Thursday, a sort of a brainstorming session among lawyers, and I made the point that she had initially referred to it as a mastermind, and I told her I don't like that term. I don't think that's accurate. You know, people are using that term very loosely. I don't think that's really what's happening with these online communities, these online hangout sessions. But you guys did a brainstorming session. You hung out, you talked about your practices, you talked through some of the things that you're going through. So I wanted to talk to you about that community stuff and that vulnerability. And really, I'm going to give you tell me what you're thinking about with that. Do you feel like these exercises of getting together with lawyers online is useful? Is it a good stand-in for local bar events? Like, what are you getting out of these online relationships?
Well, speaking specifically about the thing that we did here, I did it because like you, I was kind of curious to see what would happen. And I felt like I was with peers, even though there was a wide variety in experience and background and where we were in our careers. I mean, there were four of us. I'm not going to get into the specifics, but if there ever was a diverse group, both the age and locale and just where we were in our practices, but I felt like I was among peers, and the format was essentially everybody would introduce themselves. And, you know, in a Zoom meeting where people introduce themselves, that's always an issue. How long is it going to go? What should you say? What should you not say? But then each of us, and this was the format, brought one issue to the table that's either a problem or a concern or an issue to get feedback from the others. And this was quite an interesting experience. It reminded me of being in a writing class many years ago, and I took a couple of classes in the city, fiction and nonfiction. The format was always the same. There was a leader, which is a little different than a brainstorming group, but the teacher had clear ground rules for the class, which was once a week, someone was going to be workshopping their piece or what they were working on. And there were very, very clear ground rules as to how you give feedback. Had to be one thing, one positive comment, constructive, one thing that you had an issue or a problem with. And I knew why they had to have rules like that, because otherwise it would get very personal. Writing is very personal, just as our law practices or our ideas about law practice are very personal. And I remember from the writing class, and this same exact thing happened in our little brainstorming group. We as lawyers are very comfortable being the ones asking the questions, giving the critique, hearing what the other person says, and then telling them what we think. Quite different being, quote unquote, on the hot seat. And in our group, there was no hostility. Everybody was very encouraging, very good suggestions. It was really, really helpful. And I put a problem out there, but I actually did feel that little sense of unease, like, well, all right, enough with the hard questions. And of course, when you're in a situation like that, I think it's tempting for us as the lawyers to always want to be the one asking the question. And we want to come there and have everyone tell us, what a great idea. Here's one great suggestion for you to go forward with, instead of someone getting down to like maybe the core of what you're doing and questioning it.
Yeah, it's funny.
Nobody wants to hear that usually.
You gave the example of the writers group or whatever. And for anybody who followed along me writing Lawyer Forward, I'm a big fan of the story grid methodology. And I remember this episode of Story Grid, the podcast, where they were talking about these writers groups and basically said they're totally useless because they're sort of like group therapy and everybody's kind of reinforcing their bad habits. And it's more about, trying to be in a position where you're the advice giver, which I think is really interesting. And so I guess, not to just that, I think this was a good experiment and it's good to think about these things, but there are a lot of other groups, right? There's not just anything we would try to do. There's Lawyerist has a good group. The Moshe and Mark Homer and God, who else is involved in that? Melanie Leonard have put together a really nice thing for people who are getting up to 250,000. Theirs is really cool. Maximum Lawyers got one. And it's what without criticizing any of those efforts, because I think they're really good if you know what they're for, I think they're really good for brainstorming, for bouncing ideas around, for, like you said, just to have some kind of habit in your writing, to give an example with the writing groups. But if the idea is I'm going to go in and I'm going to take action and there's these specific steps, it's such a disaggregated social network, right? People are not there to look you in the face and go, really? You didn't do anything last week? Online networks are really hard for doing the next thing. So anyway, I don't know if that resonates for you, if you had that experience with your practice.
I mean, I had it a little bit. It's a funny thing when people are in practice and you're caught up. One of the things that's going on now is, well, now we all have time to do either a little self-examination of what we're doing, why we're doing it, where we're going, how we might get there. We also have the opportunity to talk to our friends and colleagues and peers if we choose to. And it's not something that people are comfortable doing, and it's not something I'm always comfortable doing either. But I think it's something that might be worth looking at. I was talk to our friends about our plans or about our law practice, or we want to just run some stuff by them. It's like, sometimes, well, what are we talking about? Are we really talking about this specific thing? How do I do this? How do I put this thing into practice? And how do I market this thing? How do I why are you even doing this? What are you trying to accomplish? Now, do we want to sit there and give each other therapy? I think not. On the other hand, there's an aspect of this where it's, well, what are we really talking about? So, this thing came to my mind, was like, when we talk to our friends about law, what are we talking about? There was a book of short stories by Raymond Carver, and it was put out like under many different covers. But the title of it is, and it's a collection of short stories, it's What Do We Talk About When We Talk About Love? And I just kept thinking about that. Well, what do we talk about when we talk about law? One word difference, love to law. And that collection of short stories, what do we talk about when we talk about love? There isn't one story that talks about what we talk about when we talk about love. It's a collection of short stories with everybody's quirky little story.
Right.
Well, that's what we all are.
Right.
We're everyone's quirky little story. And so our stories are always interesting to us, I think. Our stories may or may not be interesting to other people that we're talking to. Sometimes I think people think their stories are interesting. They're not so interesting, but sometimes they're very interesting. But you really want to jump in and say to the person, gee, why? What are you talking about? You have an idea of something that you want to do, but why do you want to do that? But then again, I don't know whether we want to be having a discussion like that with each other ongoing. Because to me, at a certain point, all right, you know what you want to do something, take some action.
Yeah. Well, and I this seems academic to people and esoteric, and I get it, but I think in this moment we're really seeing why this kind of thinking matters. I wrote in the book about Robin Dunbar's number, you can only have 150 close relationships, and you need those really close relationships because that's where the protection comes from, and people with mutual interests, and even in the smaller group there's like love, there's actual that kind of connection that's selfless. But even in that group, there's these close people. And what Dunbar has talked about for a decade or more is online relationships are not a replacement for those close physical relationships, that touch is necessary, that, that mutual reliance on each other is really important. And so this may sound, on one level, if you're doing brainstorming, if that's what you're doing, then you want as many diverse all over the country, outside of law, right? Like you want people who are running businesses that have nothing to do with the law. You want as many weird perspectives and heuristics as you can get. If what you're doing is a social connection and an accountability thing, and people you want to be local. Like for Barry, you need your New York people, right?
Yes.
But that's easy for me to say right now when none of us can touch each other. So, like, how are you able to move any of these connections to this COVID moment where you're not near each other, but you're still helping each other? How have you been able to maintain that?
One thing I've always been very conscious of is that I was always so into the law practice and the law practice issues and how to do it. But I realized early in my career that when I was talking to my non-lawyer friends and my family about it, if I had continued to do that as much as I wanted to do it,
you'd have no friends.
I'd have no friends. It was interesting to me. I hope I learned soon enough and didn't alienate too many people. I would be excited to talk about those things. It is somewhat of a nice, good, comforting feeling to be in a situation where if I'm talking to a couple of other lawyers in a setting where this is what we're going to talk about, and I don't have to worry about that, and they don't have to worry about that, and we develop some kind of a relationship where we trust each other. And I do agree, you can't come into the first meeting like that and say, well, all right, other than some technical suggestions and some surface feedback, and sometimes maybe that's enough, but the idea that I could talk to other lawyers that understand what this is about, and for anybody that's doing kind of practice out there as a solo with real clients or with the real business aspect of it going on, I can't be the only one that ever thought, rightly or wrongly, only us that are doing this could really understand. I'm going to say it how I usually say it: how hard this is.
Yeah.
You could couch it in it's challenging, it's hard. And people who aren't doing it may or may not get it, but to us that are doing it, I think a lot of times we feel like no one would really get it except those of us that are doing it. That's why I think on some level, it's appealing to me to talk to other people, know that they are going to listen and not judge me or not want to hear it. And when I'm in that context, I'm very interested in hearing what people are thinking and what they're doing.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair and really interesting. And there's a value to just being able to connect with people who are on the other side of the country, and we're having similar. I think both you and I, part of the reason that we shared so many stories in our books is we know that other people need to feel like you have permission to be stressed right now. You have permission to be worried. It's not weird, because there's so much posturing in law. There's so much acting like we know everything. And for people like you and me to be able to go out to other people who don't feel as secure and say, bro, I was an idiot in this instance, and this instance, and this instance. You can be an idiot too. It's okay. I think there's probably just a value to that.
Yeah, and I always like to add, whenever I was an idiot, it wasn't for naught. And I know it's trite to say, well, every time I learned a lesson, it had a value, but there was a lot of truth in that. And my biggest encouragement to people is unless you're going to do something that's just outright stupid, most of the time, if you have an idea that you can try in a way that isn't going to put you financially or personally at risk, if you think that there's something to it, try it on some level.
Yeah.
Usually, it doesn't go in the exact direction that you thought, but if you're doing it with an objective mind and in a mindful way, you're going to see things as you're doing it and say, oh, yeah, this isn't quite what I thought, but I have an opportunity to go over here now and try something that's related.
So I'm curious, how do you, you've got all these different online, I'm not speaking specifically about Lawyer Forward here as a group, but which is, sometimes I feel like it's more of like a conversation than it is like a community. Maybe that distinction doesn't make a lot of sense, but what are you wanting from, there are a lot of these different online communities, especially during COVID. There are even local communities. My church is trying to figure out how to get people to stay connected to the church while they can't see anybody in the community. I mean, this is a real issue of figuring out how to build these communities. What do you want to see from these different experiences? Why are you in these different online groups? What are you getting out of it?
I am looking to interact with people at different levels, and people sometimes are doing things that are complementary to what I'm doing. They'll know more than I know, but I also like being in groups where people are looking to me for some opinion or guidance of support and some sharing of knowledge. One of the craziest things that's going on now is there used to be events that would come across my email, something that I may have even regretted getting on their mailing list. And sometimes it would come up and it'd be interesting. Yeah, but I can't go there because it's an hour away in Long Island. And I'd like to go have breakfast with those people. I'd like to meet and sit and talk with them and hear what some of these people in areas that I don't do are doing and network with them. I would never go. But now if I'm seeing a Zoom with those same people, I've accepted a few of them. And you know what?
Sure.
I met some nice people,
right.
just like I did in your group, and just like I'm doing pretty much every day. And in different groups, you fit in different levels of the hierarchy, and that's, I think, a good thing too. It's actually a good experience.
Yeah, I hope. I don't know. My whole mission in life in general is, I always joke that I go to SSRN, which is the Social Science Research Network, and look at those academic articles and turn them into English and hand them to lawyers so that they can think about something they've never thought about before. I hope that what people will do is use the diversity of the internet to break your brain, right? To test your assumptions, check your biases, just learn some stuff, some crazy stuff. Go join a group about, gopher husbandry or something. I don't care. Go learn about something crazy. Just to expand your mind. But I also see the value of like you said, of people who get you, of these networks of people that you can get in these, sort of productive bubbles. I'm recording an episode for Above the Law for this podcast that I'm starting, which is a whole story. But basically what the episode is about is, if you get into a bubble of nerds and you guys get really excited about a problem and you really focus on it and you chat with each other and it's diverse and you figure out ways to connect with the rest of the world, you can do really great work right now. While you feel like you're alone and you're screwed and there's nobody to hang out with, you can really get into these small networks and really do some great work. There's a whole example of Venetian glass blowers, which I find fascinating. It's in the book as well. But anyway, you're a good man. I appreciate you. I do have to say, your presence in the group, you have been very kind with your time, very helpful, especially to younger lawyers. And I think some of that is just required in a profession, right? Like we've got to have some of that for this profession to go on. So I appreciate that.
I made the observation in the book, and I'll put this out there. If anybody doesn't think this is true, I'll argue with you all day long. Most lawyers that are experienced in practice, if you ask them for help or you ask them for advice, people as a rule, lawyers as a rule, are generous with their time and are very willing to help young lawyers. I started right out of school. I had mentors, they would call it now, but to me, they were just lawyers that I asked, what should I do if this happened? I could count on one hand the time when somebody turned me down. Almost always people were giving. And I'm the same way, and I actually think most lawyers are.
So Barry's number is 210-555-5555. You just call him anytime, day or night.
Yes.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, guys. We're going to chat some more tomorrow. I'm trying to remember who's even coming on tomorrow. I think like a wellness expert-y person. Make sure that you guys add questions using the Ask Twinsies hashtag so Nick and I on Sunday can give you terrible advice, because that's what I live for. Somebody said on Twitter the other day that Ask Twinsies is the only light in the world right now, which is a really low bar, but it's really fun for me. So you guys ask some Ask Twinsies questions. Thank you again, Barry. We'll see you guys tomorrow night.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much.